Hi, I'm Odellin. And yes, my own sister stood up at our mother's will reading, just to humiliate me in front of everyone. She called me the family mistake and smiled like it was her favorite game, like I was some afterthought. But what she didn't know was that our mother had rewritten everything. They thought they buried the truth. But what if the truth was buried with me, alive, waiting, with receipts? Stick around. Because what happened next didn't just silence a room, it ended a legacy built on lies. 2 days. That's all the notice I got. A stiff white envelope arrived at my Atlanta apartment with embossed lettering and a scent of old paper, 2 days before the will reading. No call, no heads up, just the letter, sitting there on my doormat like a challenge. Callista had told me she'd keep me posted. That was 2 weeks ago, at the funeral. A funeral she planned down to the color of the lilies and the press release that went out to the Alumni Association. I barely got to say goodbye to Mom in private. Now this? I sat on the couch, the letter still unopened on my lap, and reached for the silk scarf tucked inside my side table drawer. Cream-colored, soft, with faded blue stitching, J.M., Jacqueline Marin, Mom's initials, the last thing she ever gave me before things got cold. Guess I'm still the last to know, I muttered, always the afterthought. I stared at the envelope again. My name, written perfectly. Miss Odellin Marin, like a guest at someone else's party. I didn't even cry. I just stood, folded the scarf carefully back into the drawer, and started packing. Charleston still smelled like magnolias and salt air, even if my memories of it had dried up long ago. Driving up to the estate felt like stepping back into a life I'd been cut out of. The iron gates opened slow and heavy, like the place itself disapproved of me showing up. The gravel under my tires crunched louder than I remembered. Or maybe it was just my nerves. I parked around back, like always. We weren't allowed to use the front unless you were Callista, or company. The housekeeper barely met my eye when she opened the door. "Oh, you came." I didn't answer. I just nodded, stepping into the air-conditioned hush of the foyer. Everything smelled like lemon polish and lavender soap, exactly how Mom kept it. Then came the assistant, Callista's new one, tall, pouty, dripping in prep school condescension. She blinked at me like I was early to a party I wasn't invited to. "I didn't know you were attending," she said. "I was invited," I replied simply, holding up the envelope like a shield. She sniffed. "Well, they're all out by the terrace, garden attire." Of course they were. They looked like they'd stepped out of a country club catalog. Aunt Dolores gave me a warm smile and a light hug, her arms trembling a little. "Odellin, sweetheart, I'm so glad you're here. Your mom would be too." "I hope so," I said softly. Everyone else avoided eye contact, except Callista. She turned the moment I stepped onto the flagstone, her voice syrupy. "Well, look who showed up. Didn't know they were letting +1s to the reading." The air shifted. A few polite laughs, tight, nervous, but mostly silence. I didn't respond. I'd learned long ago that Callista thrived on reactions. Deny her that, and you robbed her of oxygen. I took a seat at the edge of the long table under the striped canopy. I didn't belong to their club, not with my flat shoes and $30 dress from Marshall's, but I was here. That counted. As I settled in, my eyes wandered to the hydrangeas lining the stone wall, blue and full like they were blooming just for spite. I breathed deep. Flashbacks buzzed in the back of my head. Callista getting a brand new car at 16, me scraping together bus fare, her skipping college because she deserved a break, me working 3 jobs to survive it. I was the daughter they barely tolerated, I whispered to myself, the one they always expected to stay quiet. But not this time. Just as the lawyer stepped into view from the French doors, I saw it. Callista, seated across from me, reaching into her designer purse. She pulled out a folded paper, glanced around, and slid it beneath the table toward the man seated beside her. Uncle Rowan. It was quick, smooth, practiced. But I saw it, and that's when I knew. This wasn't going to be just a reading of names and assets. It was a setup. The room shifted the moment Mr. Whitlow stepped through the glass doors of the sunroom. Conversations dropped off. The clinking of coffee spoons on porcelain plates halted mid-motion. Even the air felt different, like it held something dense and waiting. I sat still, hands folded neatly in my lap, pretending I hadn't just seen my sister slide something beneath the tablecloth. Mr. Whitlow cleared his throat and gave us a polite nod. "Thank you all for coming. I know this is a difficult time, and I'll do my best to be brief and respectful." Callista rose from her velvet chair like she was auditioning for a soap opera, her face arranged in solemn poise. She moved to stand beside the lawyer, placing a hand on his arm like they were old friends. "Let's just hope this isn't one of Odellin's surprises," she said with a bright, cutting laugh. The silence that followed wasn't supportive, it was loaded, a kind of awkward agreement that no one would challenge her. I felt my cheeks flush, but I didn't say anything. Let her have her moment. Whitlow blinked slowly, like her comment had caught him off guard, but he moved forward. He opened his briefcase with deliberate care, as though stalling might make the next part easier. "We'll begin with confirming presence," he said. "Odellin, if you don't mind, this is just a form acknowledging your attendance and your understanding of the proceedings." He handed me a single sheet of paper with a glossy blue header and an empty signature line. I frowned. "Just me?" Whitlow nodded. "Yes, just formality." From my left, Aunt Dolores shifted in her seat and leaned in slightly. "They didn't ask me to sign anything last time," she whispered, more to herself than to me. Her voice was soft but not uncertain. I studied the document. It was printed by Whitlow's firm, but something about it felt off. There were no details listed, just a title, some legal language, and that signature line. "I'd like a copy of this," I said quietly. Callista's husband, Brent, the human wallpaper, shifted slightly. For a moment I thought he might speak, but of course he didn't. Whitlow nodded again and took the form back, tucking it gently into his briefcase. "Of course." The sun filtered through the arched windows behind him, painting pale gold streaks across the carpet. A breeze brushed the sheer curtains, stirring the air enough for me to catch a trace of Callista's perfume, something expensive, sharp, and floral. She tilted her head, eyes cool and playful. "Odellin was the most attentive daughter, weren't you?" No one responded. She went on, "Especially after Mom got sick. All those late-night calls, the visits. She made Mom feel so guilty, like it wasn't enough, you know?" Her tone was light, but the weight of her words landed like a slap. She didn't say it outright, but she painted me as a manipulator in one breathless sentence. I didn't look at her. Instead, I reached for the scarf in my bag. That old silk square with my mother's initials stitched in a faded thread. I held it tightly in my palm. A flash of memory. Mom in hospice, thin as paper, her hand trembling as she pressed the scarf to her chest. Her voice barely above a whisper, "Don't let them take everything." I had nodded through tears, not fully understanding what she meant. Now, sitting in this room dressed up like a Southern brunch, I understood perfectly. This wasn't just about inheritance. This was about erasure. Mr. Whitlow cleared his throat again. "If we're all settled, I'll begin reading the last will and testament of Maribel Wainwright." He looked around the room, then paused, his eyes landing directly on me. "You may want to sit down for this." The sunroom had grown still, but not quiet. The kind of stillness that buzzed in your ears. I barely heard my own breath as Mr. Whitlow adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and unfolded the document in front of him with deliberate slowness. He started reading the will in a tone that tried, but failed, to sound routine. "Per the last legally witnessed and notarized testament," he said, "the entirety of the Marin estate, comprising the property, monetary assets, personal belongings, and residual income, is hereby left to Odellin Marin." A glass shattered behind me. I didn't even turn to see who dropped it. All I heard next was a hiss, someone muttering, "You've got to be kidding." Callista's hand, which had been resting casually on the table, jerked upward, knocking over her carefully placed water glass. Her polished expression dissolved. "What?" she breathed. Mr. Whitlow didn't flinch. "That is what the document states." Aunt Dolores's lips parted slightly, but she said nothing. I sat there frozen. I wasn't even sure I had heard it right. My name. Everything. Then came the pause. "However," Mr. Whitlow said, voice tightening, "there is a clause." Of course there was. He held up another sheet of paper and continued. "The inheritance is contingent on Miss Marin maintaining the family estate, residing in it, keeping it functional, for a minimum of 1 year. During this time, no sale, redevelopment, or transfer of property rights is permitted." He glanced briefly at Callista, then back at me. "In addition, Miss Callista Marin is to be barred from initiating or facilitating any structural changes, financial reassessments, or sale discussions concerning the estate during this period." My stomach flipped. I wasn't sure if it was from shock or from the sheer weight of what that clause meant. "This is a joke!" Callista snapped, standing so fast her chair squealed backward. "That's not what Mom wanted." She turned on me like a blade. "You put that in her head, didn't you? All those calls near the end, crying about being left out, playing the martyr while I managed everything." "Callista," Aunt Dolores tried, but was quickly silenced. No, they need to hear this," she snapped, gesturing to the few distant cousins and family friends lingering near the back. "She didn't even visit for years. Then suddenly, when Mom got sick, she's at her bedside like Florence Nightingale rewriting history." I kept my eyes steady on the tablecloth. I could feel every muscle in my back trying not to curl in shame. But shame for what? She guilted her into this, whispered to her in the dark. She didn't even cry at the funeral. I didn't flinch, not because it didn't sting, but because I knew if I gave her one tear, she'd twist it into proof. Mr. Whitlow interjected, "Miss Marin, these terms were written directly by your mother, in her own hand. The will was signed in front of a notary and 2 independent witnesses." "She was confused," Callista snapped. "She had started mixing things up. You said so yourself, Dolores." "I said she was tired," my aunt murmured, "not confused." For a moment, no one said anything. The sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting soft shadows across the floor. Ironic how gentle everything looked in a room full of knives. "Did she leave? Anything else?" I asked softly. My voice felt like it came from somewhere outside my body. Mr. Whitlow hesitated, then reached into his briefcase, producing a sealed envelope. "She did. She left this for you, O'Dellin." I took it with both hands. The envelope was heavy, more than just paper. It held something dense, almost sacred. I turned it over, breaking the seal. Inside, a single folded page. My name was at the top. Her handwriting, my mother's familiar loops and slants stretched across the page in blue ink, slightly faded. It started gently, an apology wrapped in grace, but within just a few lines, she said something that made the entire room fade from my awareness, something that redefined every memory I had of her. I didn't even realize I was holding my breath until the rustle of paper brought me back. The letter felt lighter than air, but heavier than grief. I unfolded it slowly, carefully, like if I moved too fast, the truth inside might disappear. My mother's handwriting curved across the page in a way I hadn't seen since before the tremors set in. Somehow it looked both fragile and furious. I didn't plan to read it aloud, but I did. My voice cracked on the second sentence. "To O'Dellin, you showed up when no one else did. You made me soup when I couldn't speak. You stayed when your sister filed the power of attorney papers without telling me. You are the only one who didn't ask me to sell the home, only to rest in it." No one interrupted. Not yet. Even the old grandfather clock in the corner seemed to hold its chime. I went on. The ink trembled like a whisper. "I was not confused when I wrote this. I was tired, but not confused. And I want you to know. I changed the will after she tried to sell the house beneath my feet. I couldn't stand the thought of being tucked away while strangers walked through our halls." I looked up. The sunroom felt suddenly colder. Callista stood like a statue carved from resentment. One of our cousins shifted in his chair, clearly regretting showing up in a tie. The room had shifted, just slightly, but enough that I could feel the weight of every eye turning toward her. "I didn't do anything she didn't want," Callista finally said. Her voice was strained, brittle. "She was sick, delirious. You think she could make that kind of decision in a hospice bed?" I didn't respond. I didn't have to. Instead, I stepped forward, holding the letter, and turned it toward Mr. Whitlow. "Can you confirm the date this was signed?" He adjusted his glasses, leaning in. "It was witnessed by 2 of our staff, the same day the hospice nurse noted full cognitive clarity. I have the documentation." The color in Callista's face drained fast. "You pushed her," I said quietly, not to accuse, but to state. "You talked to a realtor while she was recovering from pneumonia." Callista's voice rose an octave. "You have no idea what she was like in the end. She was scared, Odellin. She clung to your voice because you told her what she wanted to hear." Aunt Dolores stepped in, firm but calm. "Don't. You can spin it however you like, but I saw her with my own eyes. Your mother was more herself in those final days than she'd been in years. And you tried to evict her from her life." That hit harder than anything I could have said. Callista stepped back, stung. She looked around for support, but no one moved. Even her husband kept his eyes on the carpet, like the truth was too sharp to look at directly. I turned, slowly, and walked toward the parlor's front window. The letter folded in my hands like a pressed flower, something meant to last longer than its original form. I didn't say much, only, she didn't want to be sold like a property. I honored that. And that's when the silence fell. But it wasn't the silence I'd grown up with. The one that used to mean shame, that made me shrink into corners at family events or pretend not to hear when my name was left off plans. This was different. For the first time in years, no one had anything to say to me, but the silence wasn't shame, it was fear. We moved from the sunroom to the garden lounge of the estate club, where brunch was set up like nothing had just cracked a family wide open. Finger sandwiches lined silver trays, mimosa pitchers sweated onto linen, and someone had the nerve to cue up jazz music like it would soften what had just happened. I sat by the far window, sipping black coffee from a delicate porcelain cup I didn't remember owning. Across the room, I saw Callista floating from table to table, all smiles and small laughs, like she hadn't just been publicly stripped of control. She leaned in too close to some of the older guests, hand on their shoulders, nodding solemnly at all the right moments. Damage control. That was her gift, but I had no interest in performing. The letter was still folded in my lap, the creases now warm from the heat of my hand. Aunt Dolores sat beside me, quiet, alert. A few cousins passed with awkward glances. Some nodded, others just stared. But I noticed something in their eyes that hadn't been there before. Recognition. Callista's voice broke through the chatter, too loud to be casual. "Odellin always had this unique relationship with Mom," she said, turning to a trio of family friends who had known us since childhood. "She had a way of making herself the victim. Honestly, I just wish she hadn't taken advantage when Mom was at her weakest." One of the women, a friend of my mother's who used to braid my hair on Sunday mornings, let out a slow, disappointed breath. "That's low," she murmured, not quite under her breath. Dolores stood up then, not with a shout, just calmly gathered her purse, gave me a look, and walked out the French doors without saying a word. I took a slow sip of coffee, then placed the cup back on the saucer. The quiet inside me wasn't passivity, it was fuel. I stood up, not raising my voice, but cutting through the air like glass. "Callista," I said clearly, "I never needed to manipulate anyone, and I have every document to prove that." The room stilled. Callista turned to face me, that polished smile cracking just enough to see the panic beneath. "Excuse me?" "I kept the paperwork," I said, folding my arms. "Emails, signed documents, timestamps, even the voicemail Mom left me after you filed the power of attorney behind her back." A hush fell like a curtain dropping mid-scene. "You want to go public with that lie?" I asked, steady as stone. "Then I'll go public with the truth. All of it." Someone coughed in the corner. Another guest shifted awkwardly. People began to subtly turn their chairs in my direction. Callista blinked hard, her voice sharper now. "You wouldn't." I looked her in the eye. "You've mistaken quiet for weak your entire life." She didn't respond. She couldn't. The audience she thought she had was listening to me now, for once. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to throw a tantrum or play dirty. All I had to do was finally, clearly say what I should have said 20 years ago. "You don't get to shame me into silence anymore." I didn't wait for her reply. I returned to my chair, picked up my coffee, and let the room do the rest. But as I glanced up one last time, I saw it in her face. Not embarrassment, not sadness, panic. Like she'd finally realized I wasn't going to be her punching bag anymore. The brunch had ended with Callista's smile cracking, but whatever fractured that day didn't slow her down. If anything, it made her more dangerous. A week later, I found a manila envelope wedged awkwardly into my mailbox. My name was typed across the front, cold and impersonal. Inside, a court summons. She'd filed a motion to contest the will, claiming our mother had been under emotional duress and that I had coerced a dying woman into rewriting her estate. The legal term she leaned on was undue influence. I stood in my front hallway, reading the words over again. The legal language was dressed up nicely, but the meaning was clear. She was calling me a liar. I walked into my home office, turned the lock behind me, and reached for the bottom drawer of the old oak file cabinet Mom helped me refinish back in grad school. It stuck a little, humidity maybe, but I pulled it open and found what I needed. The red folder, labeled in my mother's handwriting, Supplement Addendum 3. Inside were notarized documents that she'd signed during her last month in hospice. There was a full addendum to the will, dated after her initial revisions. In it, she stated, plainly, that Callista had moved to seize control of her finances while she was recovering from pneumonia. There was even a letter to her estate attorney, attached with copies of bank statements Callista never thought anyone would see again. There were withdrawals for spa visits, jewelry, a down payment on a new car that wasn't on any gift record. I pulled the printed emails too. Mom had forwarded me copies, suspecting her own login had been compromised. I remember the message well. Odellin, don't delete these, just in case I forget later. You'll know. I knew. And now I was done letting her memory be rewritten by someone who only showed up when there was something to gain. By noon, I was on the phone with the legal clinic I'd visited once before, back when I was helping a friend through a conservatorship battle. The woman on the other end of the line asked, "Do you have supporting documentation?" "I have more than that," I said. "I have her voice." 3 days later, I walked into the county courthouse wearing pressed beige slacks and a navy blouse. Nothing flashy, just neat, clean, grounded. I kept my expression neutral, though the weight in my bag felt heavier than ever, not because of what I was carrying, but because of what it all represented. I passed Callista on the courthouse steps. She looked me up and down, then whispered to her attorney like I was a pest she hoped to brush away. Inside, at the front desk, I handed the red folder to the clerk. She opened it, scanning briefly, then paused. Her brow furrowed. "Is this the decedent's handwriting?" "Yes. Witnessed, signed, notarized." She flipped through a few more pages. Her voice dropped a tone. "You may want to sit down for this one," she muttered, though not to me. She turned to her coworker, who widened his eyes. I didn't sit. I just signed the counter-motion papers with a steady hand and stepped aside. That night, I sat in my home office, light spilling onto the hardwood, casting a soft glow over the worn corners of old files. I looked around and finally allowed myself to breathe. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about the way Callista tried to paint over history. She wanted to erase the months I fed mom broth when she could barely lift a spoon. Pretend I hadn't spent nights in a chair beside her bed while the oxygen machine hissed beside us. Erase the part where I honored Mom's wish not to be moved, not to be managed. "She's not just trying to humiliate me," I said aloud, to no one. "She's trying to erase me." But here's the thing about silence. When you let it build, let it sharpen, let it hold its shape, it cuts cleaner than shouting ever could. And this time, I wasn't hiding. She started a war over paper. She forgot I knew where the originals were buried. The sun hadn't fully risen when I left the house that morning, but the air already felt heavy, like it knew a storm was coming. I parked a block away from the courthouse, choosing the quiet rather than being dropped directly into the chaos I sensed was waiting. As I neared the plaza, I spotted them. Tripods, boom mics, people with badges that read press clipped to their coats. And in the middle of it all, my sister. Callista was already mid-performance. She had on that soft lavender coat she only wore when she wanted to seem relatable. Her makeup was perfect, but her voice was trembling in all the right ways. "I only ever tried to protect our mother," she told a journalist, her lower lip catching just the faintest quiver. "But money changes people." The reporter nodded sympathetically, jotting something on a pad. "We understand your sister is due to arrive shortly?" Callista's expression shifted for just a moment, a flash of tight control. "Yes, I'm sure she has her version." I paused just out of frame, close enough to catch every syllable, far enough to go unnoticed. So that was her move. Shape the story before I could speak. Paint herself as the grieving daughter betrayed by a greedy sister. Use the cameras to erase the evidence I held. But I came prepared. I stepped forward, heels clicking softly against the concrete. I wasn't dressed for pity, just truth. A charcoal suit, flat shoes, hair pulled back, no frills, just facts. The crowd quieted as I approached. The lead journalist, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a coffee stain on her sleeve, turned toward me. "Miss Marin?" she asked. "Would you like to respond to your sister's statement?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I reached into my tote and pulled out a sealed envelope. I handed it to her without a word. She opened it. Inside, a packet containing time-stamped screenshots, email threads showing Callista's wire transfers from our mother's joint account, and a notarized letter from the hospice nurse, dated 2 months before our mother passed. The nurse had written, "Patient expressed repeated concerns about her daughter Callista accessing bank records without consent. Recommended independent oversight. Logged on file." The journalist's lips moved silently as she scanned the page. Then she looked up. "Ma'am, where did you get this?" "My mother gave it to me," I replied. "She knew this day might come." Before the journalist could respond, a voice rose from the crowd. "I can confirm that." We all turned. Nurse Jeanette stood near the back, wearing her old badge around her neck. I was her night shift nurse. I filed a report when Miss Callista raised her voice and waved a checkbook at her mother. She was recovering from pneumonia. She cried herself to sleep that night. Murmurs rippled across the plaza. One man took a cautious step back from Callista. Another woman shook her head and muttered, "Disgusting." Callista's composure slipped. This is a smear campaign," she snapped. "None of this proves manipulation. She was dying. She didn't know what she was doing." I turned to face her fully, but my voice didn't rise. She knew exactly what she was doing. She changed her will after you tried to move her into a care facility she never agreed to. You wanted the house gutted and flipped into luxury condos. You even toured the architect through the backyard while she was asleep. Callista's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. I stepped closer, not to threaten, but to finish what had started. "I'm not here to ruin you," I said. "I'm just done pretending. Done playing the quiet one while you rewrite history in broad daylight." The cameras turned toward me. I didn't flinch. I didn't smirk. I just stood there, truth in hand, storm behind me. Silence fell again, but this time it wasn't mine. It was hers. I walked into the courtroom with steady feet, but inside my heart wasn't still. It was focused, laser sharp. There was no bailiff announcement, no formality. People had already filled the rows. Neighbors, extended cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, former church friends of Mom's. And the press, they were there too, eyes sweeping from Callista's bright blazer to my quiet gray dress. This wasn't a hearing. It was theater. And my sister had cast herself as the star. She stood just feet from the bench, one hand dramatically placed on a folder. I already knew what was inside. The older will. The one she'd pushed Mom to sign during a fevered recovery. The judge entered and everyone rose. Then came the tone that sliced the air. "We are here to finalize the probate of the estate of the late Maeve Marin. We will hear both parties' evidence. Miss Callista Marin, you may begin." Callista cleared her throat. "Your Honor, this is my mother's legally recognized will, signed, witnessed, and notarized. I've submitted copies to the court and to opposing counsel." I didn't interrupt. "Not yet." She continued, in that sickly sweet tone she always used when playing innocent. "It names me the sole executor and heir of the estate, which I accepted not out of greed but responsibility. My sister Odeline was not involved in Mom's care during her final year. She only appeared when the paperwork was done. I'm afraid my mother was pressured, possibly manipulated. The courtroom buzzed. A few reporters started scribbling. The judge turned to me. Miss Odeline Marin, do you wish to respond? I stood up, quietly without drama. I held a single envelope in both hands and walked forward. Yes, Your Honor, I have a later will, signed by my mother, dated and notarized 1 month after the version presented by my sister. The room hushed. The judge raised his brow and gestured for the bailiff. I handed over the envelope, sealed in pale blue, my mother's handwriting looped across the flap. Familiar, soft, undeniably hers. The judge slit the top carefully. His eyes skimmed. He nodded. This document appears legally valid. Date, July 9th. That's 4 weeks after the previous will. Witnesses listed: Dolores Marin and Jeanette Holloway. Notarized by state-certified notary Erica Plath. Callista's composure cracked. She took a step forward. She forged it. That's a fake. I didn't flinch. I simply turned toward the AV tech in the corner of the courtroom. Could you play the file, please? The screen flickered. The judge gave a small nod. And there she was. My mother. Thinner than I remembered, but with a calmness in her eyes that silenced every breath in the room. If this is ever played, she began softly, it means Callista has tried again to twist my intentions. I made another will because she tried to put me in assisted care against my wishes. She contacted a realtor behind my back, and she withdrew over $8,000 without my permission. Odeline didn't pressure me. She protected me. That's why everything is hers now. And it's what I wanted, clearly, freely, and with full capacity. A cough broke the silence. I turned and saw Callista frozen mid-step, mouth open, eyes locked on the screen like it had betrayed her. The judge spoke firmly. This confirms testamentary intent. I will accept the July 9th will as the operative document unless there is irrefutable evidence of fraud, which, based on this footage and notary records, I do not see. Callista's voice pitched up. She was dying. She didn't know what she was saying. But no one met her eyes, not even the reporters. The judge turned to me. Do you have anything else to submit? I shook my head. Only that I loved my mother, and I respected her choices. In the front row, Aunt Dolores gave a slight nod, a silent vindication. And as the gavel fell, I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just stood tall, let her scream, let her deny. The truth didn't need to shout anymore. By the time we stepped out of the courthouse, the sun had shifted west, brushing the stone steps with a soft gold light. I didn't need to turn to know Callista wasn't walking beside me. She'd stayed behind, hunched in the corner like the weight of her own lies had finally caught up. She didn't yell this time. She didn't even look at me. Just silence. Not the kind I'd known growing up, the one that left me aching for acknowledgement. No, this silence felt earned, final. Like a page closing. Cameras flashed. Reporters called out my name. Odeline, will you comment? Did you expect the video to play in court? How long have you had the second will? I didn't stop. I gave them what Mom would have called my weather face, the one I used in storms, funerals, and Sunday dinners when Callista made another backhanded comment. I walked down the steps and found Romy waiting at the curb in her old Toyota, her hand already resting on the passenger door. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at me, then at the courthouse, then back at me again like she was measuring whether I was okay or just holding together out of habit. You ready? She finally asked. No, I said, but I'm done. The ride home was quiet, just the faint hum of tires on pavement and the occasional thump of my heartbeat in my throat. By the time we pulled into my driveway, dusk had arrived. That in-between hour where everything looks a little softer but feels more honest. I stepped out and inhaled deep. Oak, dry grass, the faintest trace of the jasmine Mom had planted years ago. Inside, Romy followed me to the porch, then stopped just shy of the screen door. She reached into her bag and pulled out something that made my breath catch. A letter, singed at the edges. Familiar. I found it tucked inside the lining of your mom's old wallet, she said. Didn't look like something you'd want strangers digging through. I took it gently. The paper was creased and brittle, but the ink, her handwriting, was still there. The envelope was addressed simply, "To my youngest, my silent warrior." I didn't read it right away. I sat on the swing first, let the cicadas buzz in the distance, let the quiet settle. Then I opened it. "You always were the strongest, even when they pretended not to see. I hope one day you realize you didn't need their praise to matter. Some truths aren't spoken. They're lived, and you lived it right. I love you, always. Mom." It wasn't grand, it wasn't poetic, but it was everything I never got to hear her say out loud, and it came exactly when I needed it, when I wasn't looking for validation anymore. Just peace. Romy brought out 2 glasses of tea. We didn't toast, we didn't make speeches. She just sat beside me as the sun disappeared behind the treetops, and the porch light blinked on like it knew the moment needed quiet. I looked around at the chipped paint on the banister, the stubborn flower pot Callista always said was too small town, the wind chimes that clinked like they were whispering instead of ringing, and I thought about all the birthdays I spent waiting for someone to show up, all the report cards, the hospital visits, the solo Christmas mornings, waiting. But now I didn't feel empty. I felt full, in a quiet, steady kind of way, because I wasn't living for their acknowledgement anymore. I wasn't trying to earn a seat at a table that was never built for me. I'd made my own space on this porch in this house, with this letter in my lap and a friend beside me. Callista might never apologize. The family might always talk in hushed tones about what happened. And maybe I'd always be the one who broke the silence. But that silence had protected lies long enough. Some wounds don't need to be loud to be remembered. Some victories don't need applause to be real.